This board workshop meeting of the Board of Trustees of Socorro ISD is being held December 8th, 2020. The time is 5:30. This meeting will be held by teleconference. The teleconference audio can be accessed at the following toll-free number, 1-877.
This conference will now be recorded.
2073 using the access code 300-576-589 and through an audio feed located at our YouTube channel. Any member of the public wishing to comment on an agenda item can send the comments to the following email address, board-questions@sisd.net. On March 16th, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meetings laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to the coronavirus. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. Number one, although members of the board are not gathered in a central physical location, we do have a quorum in attendance at this meeting by telephone call and internet access. Number two, we are meeting by use of both telephone conference call, online access, and through use of an email link for questions. Number three, if a member of the public submitted written comments in advance, the board president or a member of the administration will read the comments into record before or during the board's consideration of that item. If you would like to provide comment at a future meeting conducted by video conference or telephone call, please follow instructions on the meeting notice. Number four, all other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. Number five, an audio recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. Number six, we apologize in advance for any unforeseeable difficulties and ask for your patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. Number seven, if you have questions about these suspended laws, please call the Office of the Attorney General at 888-672-6787. And although it's not listed on our agenda at this time, we will, if you'll all please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance, which is going to be led tonight by Ms. Chavez from Butler Elementary School.
Thank you, Board President. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chavez. And now before we get started, I'll do a roll call to ensure we have a quorum. Mr. Morales?
Present.
Mr. Guetta?
Present.
Is Mr. Gondeta on? He was going to be just a couple of minutes late. Okay, he'll be here in just a minute. Mr. Garcia?
Present.
Mr. Mena?
Present.
And Ms. Rodriguez?
I'm here.
Yay. Okay, so with the exception of Mr. Gondeta, we're all accounted for. So we will move to item number 2, board workshop A, health plan design changes for the 2021-2022 school year. Mr. Carmona.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Board President Nájera, Dr. Espinosa, and members of the board. My name is Mario Carmona, Director of Employee Benefits and Risk Management. Today, Mr. Lou Arias, Mr. Gary Heisel, and I are here to present a follow-up workshop presentation related to health plan projections for fiscal year 21-22. The following presentation summarizes data reviewed by our insurance consultant, Gallagher. It includes information such as plan history, projection assumptions, renewal workup, areas to impact plan, and possible next steps to mitigate cost. Changes and/or recommendations would need to be made before our next annual benefits open enrollment period, which typically takes place during the month of April. This would be for the following plan year, which becomes effective as of July 1st, 2021. At this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Arias and Mr. Heisel to continue the presentation.
Yes, good afternoon, President Nájera, Dr. Espinosa, and distinguished members of the board. My name is Lou Arias. I am the account executive who's assigned to Socorro Independent School District. I work very closely with your staff there at Socorro. I also have Mr. Gary Heisel, who was kind enough to cover in my absence a couple of weeks ago when he did the first presentation with the first set of options and recommendations that he had to this board on possible changes to the plan itself and a combination thereof of contributions. My understanding is that the board asked Gallagher to continue to work with the Socorro staff and come back with some alternative options that were less drastic than the ones we initially provided. And so we've been working with the staff there at Socorro, and we've come up with another set of options that we would like to present to you this evening as a continuation of the presentation a couple of weeks ago. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think I need somebody to allow me to do that. Did you want me to share my screen, or does everybody have the slides there and I can just name off the slides and go from there?
We have the slides, Mr. Arias.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and do that. So the first slide is just basically the cover slide. I'd like to move to the next slide, which shows the plan history. And I believe Mr. Heisel had already shown this to you before, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's just a recap as to what had transpired in plan year 18-19. There was a deficit of $4.6 million, and then it gives you the enrollment. In plan year 19-20, there was an additional deficit of $6.1 million with the enrollment headcount. And then looking at plan year 7-1 through 10-31, which is 4 months of data, once again showing there continues to be a deficit of $2.3 million, and that's with 4 months worth of data. I think Mr. Heisel also highlighted the areas in red where the plans are identified individually. And if you'll notice that the portions in red all fall in the Premier Plan, that is where your deficits are occurring. And I know there was discussion as to the Premier Plan being the plan that's costing the district money and causing these deficits. These budget numbers that we provided includes the employee contributions that's collected from the employees via payroll deductions, in addition to the Socorro contribution of $575 per employee per month. And then the actuals, the claims themselves, or the actual cost, is the paid claims, but it also includes the administration and the stop loss premiums, and which show up as the actual. So the assumptions that we're making coming up with this projection is that Socorro will remain at a 7/1/21 effective date. I'm sorry, I'm on the next slide. Slide 3. The assumptions are that the plan will stay effective 7/1/21. They originally used 12 months of claims data of 10/1/19 through September 20. However, we were able to get an updated claim dump, so we are now using updated claims using 11/1/2019 through 10/31/2020. We're assuming the administration fee, there will be a 3% increase, that the stop loss will come in at a 20% increase on the ISL and 5% on the ASL. We're looking at medical trend of 5.8 and 7.7 for pharmacy. We're assuming that there's not going to be any significant migration between plans, that the current benefits remain the same, and that the estimated rebates on pharmacy were included in our projection. As Mr. Heisel shared with you a couple weeks ago, the original overall rate increase was 27.6%. However, having an extra month of claims and having it updated as indicated in Roman number 2, that rate action has changed to 24.9. And so the claims did improve, which helped the district in October. So we did adjust that overall rate action from 27.6 to 24.9. Moving to slide 4, the options for changes. There were changes that were submitted as options a couple weeks ago. What we're going to be talking about and showing you today were some of the additional options that we were asked to come back with based on the conversation from the last board workshop. And so we are continue current contributions for the Premier and the Basic plan as is. We are looking at increasing the deductible for the Premier plan by $200 for each single employee and $400 for the family. Increase the deductible on the Basic plan by $200 and $400 by the family. And as per the working with your staff there at Socorro, moving $4 million from the general fund into the benefit plan. So if I move to the next slide, which is slide 5, this will show the plan changes and the deductible changes. Up top, I show your current benefits. And if you notice, the deductibles on the Premier plan are $650 in network. On the Basic plan, $1,000, and then the family deductible, $1,300 on the Premier, $2,000 on the Basic. That's what you currently have today. We're not touching the HSA plan, leaving it this as is. Now, if you look right below that in the second table, we're showing the changes that you're making in red. And so increasing the deductible on the Premier plan from $650 to $850. We're also increasing the out-of-network deductible from $1,000 to $1,300. And if you look at the Basic plan, again, we're increasing the deductible by $200. The out-of-pocket the deductible for the family at $2,400. And then you're out-of-network from $2,000 and $4,000 from $1,600 and $3,200. So we did not make any other changes to the plan other than what's indicated in red, and we're leaving the contributions as is today. So what does that equate to? If we go to slide number 6, here's the result, resulting surpluses or deficits based on those changes. So today for 2020, the budget is $50.6 million. You're going to need for 7/1/2021, $63.2 million, or 24.9%, which equates to $12.6 million. If we look at the changes that we said in the options down below at the table below, so we discussed moving $4 million from the general fund. Obviously, that would provide a $4 million savings, which brings the deficit down to 8.6. By changing the deductibles on the Premier plan by $200 and $400 on the family, that creates a savings of $593,000 on the Premier plan, makes the deficit down to just a little over $8 million. And then once again, increasing the deductibles on the Basic plan by $200 on the individual and $400 by the family, creates a savings of $1.1 million. That is the plan that has the majority of the folks on there. That's why that number creates a larger savings than it does on the Premier plan. And that brings your deficit down to $6.8 million once we add that in there. So grand total of all considerations on the plan changes to the Premier and the Basic, and if we include the $4 million moved from the general fund, that's a total of $5.7 million, almost 5.8. And so by doing that and increasing the deductibles, the plan will be approximately short by $6.8 million. I'd like to kind of stop there and get some feedback or questions that the board might have, but these are the options that we came back with that had the least amount of disruption, but tried to create as much savings as we could, but not quite as drastic as what we showed you a couple of weeks ago. So at this point, I'd like to entertain any questions you might have in regards to what I've shown you.
President Nájera, it's Mr. Mena. I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mena, go ahead.
Yeah, so you mean to tell me that after we increased the deductibles and we transferred $4 million, we're still short $6.8 million?
That is correct.
Wow.
So this is this is Tony Dessa. I just want to say this is an assumption, right, Lou? This is a worst case scenario.
Well, it's not necessarily worst case scenario. We're basing this on where we think your claims, your estimated or expected claims to come in. So if your expected claims come in at that $63.2 million, and you hit that mark right on the money, you'll still be short that $6.8 million. Now, your claims could improve. You notice that when we updated the claims from October, the rate action did come down a little bit. Claims could come in under $63 million, and so therefore that 6.8 would decrease.
Okay.
This is based on what expected claims are.
So this is excuse me, this is Gary. Thanks for having us, by the way. Pardon me. So I think I wanted to reiterate, you may recall from our last meeting a few weeks ago, there was a strong consideration of having a severe impact to employees for the suggestions that we had. I think two of the major ones that we had spoken about was increasing the monthly contributions that come out of people's paycheck. There was a big concern about that because of potential pay raises or lack of pay raises. You didn't want to have anything get eaten up by the medical plan. And then secondly, you may recall the Premier plan is the one a couple slides ago, about 3 slides ago, I believe, that was losing the money for the district. And so one of our considerations originally was to remove that plan and move people to the basic, and that was not really thought very well of by the board. I think there was a little trepidation as to making significant changes. So we said, that's fine. You know, we can do that and we can tinker with the plan a little bit, but unfortunately that plan's still running at a deficit. So in trying to meet somewhere, at least in the middle, by not increasing what comes out of people's paycheck and having all 3 plans giving people a choice, because the benefits are quite good in relation to other local districts, this is what we came up with. So it is a little bit of a change, but it's still, at the end of the day with this, as Lou was saying, we expect next year your plan is going to be about $63 million. And by doing this and not changing what people pay, you're still going to be about 6.8 short.
Mrs. Nájera?
Yes, Mr. Gondeta.
Real quick, Mr. Reza. So are we planning to put in 4 million?
Yes, sir. What we're looking at is this year at the end of 20, we're going to put in $4 million. So, or $4.5 million.
I know, I hate to cut you real quick, but we usually put in 9, don't we?
Yes, sir. So we put in $9 million the last 2 years. We wanted to start scaling it down. This year, we're looking at about $4.5 million for fiscal year 21. So right now we're trending at about $2.5 million deficit. Last year in 2020, before we went ahead and did the transfer, we were looking at about $4 million as a deficit. So we ended up, according to our audited financials, which you'll see next month, about $13 million in reserves. So with respect to coming to next year, I do think that we can put in $4.5 million and look at how we're trending this year and perhaps be able to absorb these particular recommendations that we're doing. In other words, asking the board to consider and accept these changes in one way or another that we're recommending, which is certainly the changes to the Premier plan or the basic plan or one of them. And then see how we end up this year, and then looking at 2021, 22. And you know, Mr. Gandara, this is our assumption at this point right now. Again, this is for 21, 22. If we're doing better than expected, and if it's the board's desire, we can put in more in the healthcare plan at that time, if things are looking well.
Well, my thought on it at the end of the day is anything we can do to help our employees, especially during these hard times, because, you know, some families right now, they're only one person that's working. And they're taking these hard hits, and anything that we can do to help them out is something that we really need to look into and keep doing. You know, we've done it the past 2 years where we've helped our employees by putting in $9 million the past 2 years to make sure that their rate stayed low. And right now, during these difficult times, you know, it would be tough to not to help as much as we could. And then if we can, I think that we should do more. This is what we can do, what we can do. But if we can do more, let's try to do more to help out our employees.
Yes, sir. So for 2021, right now our plan is to put in $4.5 million, but as we go towards the latter part of the fiscal year, as we get more updated financial information, I know that TEA is certainly reimbursing school districts for technology purchases, and we're certainly submitted a claim for that. Perhaps we can put in some more towards the latter part of the 2021 to supplement and certainly support these changes that we're asking the board to consider. And even with that, we'll look in 21, 22 and see what else we can support this plan.
President Nakara, I got a question. This is Paul Garcia.
Yes, sir, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Reza, can you give me a practical example of how this is going to impact our employees?
So the changes that we're recommending here is the fact that there is not going to be an increase, at least when you look at that summary of changes. There will not be an increase for our employees out of pocket, out of their paycheck. Let me put it that way. So there is no changes to their premiums that they're currently paying. So there will be no change whatsoever for those employees. What we're recommending is that certainly if they use the plan, then depending on whether it's the premier or the basic plan, and certainly we're giving you an option to make changes to both plans or one plan or no plan. But let's say we're asking you to change one plan. We'll take the premier plan. Then if an employee's out of pocket in network is less than the current amount, then it doesn't impact them because they haven't hit that maximum amount. Let's say it's an employee and they're in the premium plan and their deductible comes out to $500. Well, this change doesn't impact him or her because they haven't reached the in-network deductible amount. Now, if it goes up, if it goes over and they're in network and it's over $650, then they pay up to $850. So they might impact them that way. But as you can see, they're not going to see any changes unless they use the plan and if they use it extensively.
So it's my understanding that this would really impact our most sickly employees.
Yes, sir. But they're using the plan. Yes, sir. You're right. The ones that are going to be using the plan significantly.
Thank you.
And again, that's subjective.
Are there other questions?
Yes, President Nahid, Mr. Mena, I got a couple questions for Tony.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Tony, were you able to I remember you talked about getting a better deal through the hospitals, through maybe Providence, or was it the Sierra? Were you able to get a better deal through there, or is that still?
That's still pending, Mr. Mena. That's something we're going to look at certainly in the spring and in the fall of next calendar year, 2021. That's certainly something, a consideration that we want to look into. What we're asking the board's consideration is to allow us to make one of these changes or the changes, whatever the board's preference, and allow us to see how the clinic comes on board with respect to certainly servicing our employees and hopefully saving us money, and then looking at those particular changes with hospitalization and so forth. That takes a little bit of time, but this is kind of a measure to be able to at least impact us somehow while we look at these other options that may minimize the impact on our employees.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to move just go to the last slide, which just talks about next steps. And so we're having that discussion on those plan changes. The contributions for each plan can be discussed as well. I know we had submitted originally some options that made actual changes to the contributions of the plans, but as Mr. Heisel said, and just based on some of the conversation I heard tonight, is that now may not be the time to start asking for additional amounts from the employees' paychecks to help offset that cost. but we can certainly talk about that or show you options, additional options. Any other additional plan changes for 7/1/21 we can certainly run. We made some smaller changes that made an impact. However, we still 6.8 short, and so any additional changes that we would be asked to do, keep in mind if you're looking at making, if we go from 200 to 300, quite frankly, that's not going to make a huge impact to the bottom line. The noise it'll create as far as people calling and saying, hey, the plan change may not be worth the savings. So if we're looking at additional plan changes, just keep in mind that they would need to be, and I don't want to scare anybody, but they'd have to be a little bit more drastic than what we did here, but I guess not so drastic than what we first showed you originally. The stop loss will be bid, as it always is, in April or May, and that's the insurance that you pay, the actual premium. And so when we bid that stop loss, we'll be looking at other carriers and hopefully potentially get some better deals there. The stop loss does impact the overall cost, but the majority of the cost, it comes from the claims themselves. We can communicate for 7/1/2021 open enrollment on once we have that stop loss bid on what everything looks like. The stop loss really doesn't have a direct impact to employees. And then again, we talked about considering bidding the medical plan for next plan year to see if we could possibly get better deals, if there's a better deal out there. Does anybody have any additional questions or comments?
Yes, sir. When the board votes to make these changes, any or all, whatever the board decides, when would these changes take place?
The changes would take place going into the next plan year, which starts 7/1/2021. However, keep in mind, as Mr. Carmona mentioned, he starts his annual enrollment and opens it up for the employees. So whatever changes the board decides to do, we need to try and get those done before 4/1 so that Mario, Mr. Campoya have adequate time to communicate any plan changes to the employees prior to open enrollment.
Okay.
But they would take effect in July.
I apologize if I may. So typically we start communicating with our staff and getting ready in March. So we, whether it's through a enrollment guide or any other means of making the employees aware of upcoming changes, that way they can be ready for the actual open enrollment period and make them further aware that the change will become effective July 1st of 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I don't know if there's any questions at this point, but if we may, would it be possible to take this item as an action item for the next board meeting?
Yes, sir, Ms. Carmona, I think we could, but I would like to hear input from the board on their thoughts on any or all of these options that have been presented to us.
President Nahara, this is Mr. Guerra.
Yes, sir, Mr. Guetta.
First, I would like to commend Mr. Reza and his team and Mr. Carmona and Mr. Campoya for the changes they did, because of the first presentation, obviously, it was some major changes, and the second presentation was completely different, and it was a drastic change, which this second presentation was a lot, I guess, less of a much drastic change, which I think was much better and a less hit to the employees. But at the same time, and I see that we're still going to take a hit of $6 million, and we're self-funded, and we all understand that. But anything that we can do to help our employees, especially during the time right now, and I know it's difficult, and I know we're having some difficult challenges, Mr. Reza, but I know you guys are doing a great job, And I thought the plan and you guys came up with today, where it doesn't hit us monthly, but it will hit them in the deductible. And I think that's a better plan than hitting us monthly. If you could come up with something else, maybe like, and I know you mentioned, Mr. Lou, where lowering the deductible might not be much of an impact, but if we could come up with something where it won't hit the employees as much, anything that we can come up would be great. But I do want to commend you all for this second plan, which is substantially a lot better than the first board workshop. Thank you all.
Mr. Guetta, if
Thank
I
you.
can confirm, are you asking for them to come back with an increase in premiums?
No, not increasing premiums at all. What I'm asking is that I'm glad they didn't increase the premiums. What I'm asking is that if any way possible, maybe they could, no, not increasing premiums at all. No. I'm glad they're not increasing premiums and that they decided to go with the deductibles. And if there's any way possible that maybe even lower the deductibles if possible.
Yeah, unfortunately, lowering the deductible would take us in the opposite direction. It would increase the deficit. That is why in the first set of plans that we did a combination of lowering the deductible and in conjunction with adding more premium, either from the district or from the employees to help offset that. But if we lower deductibles, we're going in the wrong direction. If we leave the plan as is at the $650 and the $1,000, then if you go to the slide 6, that adds back in that $593,000 and $1.1 million, which means we'll be short the 12.6 minus the 4 million that's going to be put into the plan. Lowering the deductibles without having a change in the contribution takes us in the wrong direction, unfortunately.
No, and I get it, but in our angle, we're always looking for cost-saving measures for our employees as well too. So I understand that, and we're looking at both sides. So anything that we can do to help cost savings for employees, that's what we're trying to do as well too. So I get, we want to see both sides of it as well.
So are you asking us to come up with something that has a lower deductible than today?
If that's possible. I mean, maybe not $200, maybe $50, maybe $30, something else. So we could come up with different kinds of plans. We still have till March. We're in December right now. Maybe we could come up with different kinds of plans.
We can certainly do that. Just understand that making changes, $50, $100, the impact, and I understand what you're saying, and I know every penny helps. $50, $100 on that deductible helps your employees. Making that kind of a change, whether it's up or down, has a very small impact, maybe $50,000, if that, if we make it by $50. But we can certainly show this to you if you'd like to see those. I just want to make sure, I don't want to set an expectation that by changing the deductible, going from $650 to $600, that it's going to make it'll make an impact, but in the wrong direction, but not quite a large impact. If you're saying only raise it, go from $650 to $700, and only have the employees take on an additional $50 on deductible over today, we can certainly do that. But the impact to the savings is going to be very minimal. But it would show some savings, just not as much. But I completely understand your point on the deductibles and trying to help the employees. I just want to set the expectation that those smaller types of changes to those deductibles don't have that much of an impact. No, we can certainly show that to you.
No, and I'm aware of that, but I believe a couple of years ago, Mr. Ressa, there was one time where we didn't raise our insurance at all. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. We didn't touch it, and now we have a pandemic. So let's see what we can do a cost savings.
Yes, sir. I mean, as I mentioned before, I mean, we're certainly looking at hopefully putting in $4 million into the healthcare fund, and maybe we can increase it some more, and maybe make a slight change. But I was hopeful that maybe we can get a consensus of some of these changes for the healthcare plan, because even though it's we have to make those changes by March, we were hopeful that maybe I'll just get it completed and get it done. But I'll see.
President Nahas, Mr. Mena.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mena.
Tony, so how much money are we gonna end up putting total? I'm looking at 4 million and then another 6.8. So that's 10.8, almost $11 million that we're gonna put in. Is that correct?
What the model is suggesting is that we would have a deficit of about $6.5 million if we make these changes. Now we have at the end of 2020, we're going to have about $13 million in reserves to cover that. Now in 21, we're hopeful that we kind of stay the same. So bottom line is that we wouldn't be putting in $10 million. Well, to the extent that you'd have put in $4 million as a transfer, and then the $6 million deficit that would incur, then I would think that you're looking at, if we have $13 million in reserves in 2020, and we end up ending 2021, right now it's looking like it's going to be a $4 million deficit, and we're going to put in $4 million. We'll still have $13 million. So I think you're looking at probably having about $5 to $6 million in reserves available. We're not going to put in, I mean, it's just additional expenses given the model that we have.
So this is what I suggest. So the majority, so the Premier plan was costing us money, right?
Correct.
And the basic plan is basically self-funded. It's doing well. Why don't we leave the basic plan alone and maybe increase the Premier plan to try and get more people to cross over into the basic plan? Just a suggestion, you know, and maybe that'll help us out a little bit.
I agree, Mr. Mena. It's very hard to justify increasing the basic plan when they are self-sufficient, basically.
Right.
The Premier plan is where all of our cost is coming from.
Yes.
And I mean, with the district putting in the 4 million, it is my opinion that, you know, of course it's during the pandemic. We don't want to add any additional cost to our employees' monthly premiums. It's something we may have to do in the future.
I agree with you, but we're giving them a choice. You can always go to the basic plan, or you can stay with the premium plan. And if you choose to stay in the premium plan, it may have to cost you a little bit more. That's just my opinion also.
Exactly.
Get out of this rut.
Exactly. And it's not going to completely dig us out of the hole that we're having to pay every year, but it will help. Do we have other questions, comments, concerns?
I just wanted to add, this is Mr. Morales, Vice President. Just wanted to add, I thank you all for your efforts. I appreciate, we appreciate, I know it's tough when you're dealing with insurance premiums and deductibles. And I feel that you met, you know, your objective and also the goal that we set. But I'm okay with it to move forward. If the other board members feel the same way, I'm okay with it.
Any other comments?
I'm just kind of curious what is, I'm sorry, Ms. Nahara, it's just the Premier and the basic, I mean, I don't know if you all know that, but I mean, what would exactly be the difference in benefit there?
It's just.
So if, oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Audience.
Well, yes, if we do as suggested and not touch the basic plan and only increase the deductible on the premier plan, your premier plan today has a deductible of $650, which means the employee pays the first $650, and then after that, the plan pays 90%. And that does not count office visits. So if you have a general, a general cold or what have you, those have copays. That doesn't hit the deductible. These are for major services that are done on an inpatient or outpatient basis and maybe some lab work. So if we only increase the premier plan from $650 to $850, that means that the folks that choose to stay in the premier plan will look at it and say, I'm being deducted X, and in exchange, I'm going to be charged $200 more potentially if I use the plan. Whereas on the basic plan, it stays at $1,000. So if that person will make a choice. Do I say I'll just go to the basic plan? It's less, and I'll incur the $1,000, or is it worth it for me to pay additional for the $850? And because the $850 is so close to the $1,000, it's really hard to say how many people would actually migrate from premier to basic, because even though it's a gap, it's not that much of a gap. But it's a starter, and we can see how many would actually move over from premier to basic. I mean, if you don't have a bunch of people do that, the impact is going to be very, very small. And you might still have a situation where the premier is costing the plan money and the basic is self-sufficient or actually subsidizing the premier.
I just want to say, Mr. Garcia,
Sure.
also keep in mind that I think what's on the table here is we asked the board's consideration to make a change in the premier plan where we increase the deductible, $200 for single, $400 for family, and certainly there's a out of network. But you've got about 32% of our employees are their families are in the premier plan. So if that's the consideration of the majority of the board, then what you're looking at is that about 65% of the employees will see no change because the basic plan stays the same, and they're in the basic plan.
Thank you. Thank you for the info.
So, Mr. Mena, I have a question for Tony.
Go ahead, Mr. Mena.
So, Tony, you said 65% of our employees are in the basic plan.
Yes, sir. If memory serves, given that presentation that was presented in November, I think around 64% of our employees are in the basic plan.
So the majority of our employees are in the basic plan, and the basic plan is doing well, per se. It's the premier plan that we're losing about $9 million there, if I am correct from the previous workshop, right?
Yes, sir. And I just want to point out that if you look at the prior page, I mean, the basic plan had higher increase in expenditures from 19 to 20 compared to the premium plan. But again, there's more employees there. That's why we listed the options for both plans. But certainly that would be a consideration where you're not impacting the majority of the employees.
This question is for Mr. Arias. Mr. Arias, what, with all your expertise with school districts, what do you recommend to try and keep costs down and not impact our employees that much?
Well, as far as impacting costs, somebody said it earlier, you have to kind of make, if the district if we're not talking about collecting any additional contributions, either from the district, the 575, forget, the general fund balance, just the district's contribution, and we're not going to entertain increasing the employee's contribution, then basically what we're saying is we're not going to impact the employee on a monthly basis based on the premium. Then the only other choice is to do what we're doing here in that the member is only impacted at the point of service, meaning those who use the plan. And as you heard Mr. Reza, that could be subjective. You could say that, well, that's not fair because the ones that need it the most are the ones that are impacted. However, quite clearly the Premier plan, they're the ones that are using it the most. And I'm not trying to be, mean or anything like that, but maybe they should pay a little more because of the utilization. If you look at the Premier plan, it's got a lower deductible and it has a higher premium that comes out of those employees' pockets every month. People who pick that Premier plan fall into one or two categories. They are the utilizers and they're willing to pay at the time of, monthly, so not to pay so much at the point of service. And that's why they bought up. Because if I was relatively healthy, I would be fine with the basic plan. I'm not going to use $1,000 worth of services and I don't have to have all that money taken out of my paycheck. The other category would be is that I'm relatively healthy, but I want to make sure it's insurance. It's an umbrella for a rainy day and I can afford to buy up and I'd rather have that security. And so when you say what would our recommendation be in to help the employees, if we're looking at, the bottom line is that the plans as we are now with the contributions aren't paying for themselves. And the district also can't continue to pay $6 million, $9 million every year this happens. And I'm very sensitive to the changing of the benefits. But quite frankly, and I think Gary or somebody may have mentioned this last board meeting, Socorro does have some very rich benefits, probably better than most, if not all, the districts there in El Paso. I think that in the long run, short term, I think $200 is reasonable of an increase. The downside to that is the district still has to come up with that shortage. In the long run, I think we need to take a good look at the plan designs themselves and look at what could potentially be absorbed by the employees in the form of deductibles. Because if we're not going to touch contributions, then we have to look at deductibles. And the other thing I will throw out there that we're looking at doing next plan year because of the timing issue is that how do we know that we still have the best deal on the table? I mean, if you ask me this, first quarter next year, I'm thinking we probably need to put this back out to the marketplace and look at some of the other carriers out there that may have a better discount, meaning they're paying less for the heart attack than your current carrier is because of their deal strength. And you can at least make up some ground there and make minimal changes to the plans. But I kind of see that as a long-term play. I mean, I know there was some discussion about it last month, and I believe the consensus was that we wouldn't go down that road for RFP this year. But in the long term, I think that's something that we absolutely need to look at.
This is Gary. Another thing that you can do that won't impact the employees, but may get them to think a little bit, excuse me, at open enrollment, is to look at, just take the deductible. We've spoken quite a bit about the deductible. Take a look at that in relation to the two plans and compare it against how much gets taken out of your paycheck. So today, if you have single coverage, so employee-only coverage, the difference in the deductible, just in network, let's assume everybody goes in network. It's $650 on the Premier plan and $1,000 in the basic plan. So that's a $350 difference over the course of a year. Like, okay, that's something. The single person who is taking the Premier plan is paying $100 a month more out of their paycheck by doing that. So essentially, another way to look at it is they're paying $1,200 more out of their pocket, and in exchange for that, they're just getting a deductible that's $350 less. If, depending upon how that can be communicated to get people to think, they may say, wait a minute, that may not be worth it for me. If I could save $100 a paycheck and I only have an additional $350 deductible, I may do that, particularly if you're relatively healthy. And the same thing holds true for, people that have spouses and families and so forth. It's kind of the same thing. The difference in the deductible levels and even the out-of-pocket levels is outweighed by how much comes out of their paycheck. People, a lot of times, there's not just Socorro, it's many other districts that people just look at what comes out of the paycheck and that's about it. But if they start to do some of the math around it and compare, hey, if I went to this, I would get, essentially, you kind of get a raise. That may be something for them to think of. And you can put examples like that in your communication materials and get people to perhaps start thinking a little bit differently, and thus save the district some money, and you're not having to increase payroll contributions for people.
And I'd also like to add just on that, on that note, you would probably see more of a savings. In fact, I know you would, if you started doing that type of education between the Premier and the Basic against the HSA plan. You may have folks that don't use the plan, that don't even need to be on the Basic plan. It could be on the HSA plan.
So
And
then,
that would create.
So then you're saying if we educated our employees a little bit better between these two plans, say maybe have some sort of workshop for them, we could probably maybe convince them to switch over.
You could, if they understood the math. That's the trick, is if they understand the math. Like Gary said, they're so focused on what comes out of their paycheck,
right?
But don't take into consideration the difference in if they actually use the plan, what that's buying them. I know let me ask this question, and Mario, you might know the answer to this. Does your current open enrollment software or administrator have the capability to what they're going to call it decision-making tools, where it shows examples like this, and it shows the plan side by side based on the differences in deductible versus the amount pulled out of their paycheck to help them make that decision based on their utilization?
Yes, there's a cost feature analyzer through Cigna and the web enrollment portal.
So, I mean, that would be, there would be a cost, but I mean, we can do that just with education if we needed to, but we'd have to start, fairly quickly. And Mario, you would know your population, what the best way for outreach on employees. I mean, not everybody reads, all the emails, especially if it has to do with insurance sometimes.
And many times the Cigna models or, pick your carrier, it doesn't really matter. They have good cost estimating tools as far as what the plan does, but they generally don't take into account what comes out of people's paycheck. And I think there could be instances I can just see looking at this, wherein if I'm looking at this, there would be no financial reason for me to ever take the Premier plan. It would be just too expensive. And I think the point here is to get people to start looking at this a little bit more closely than maybe they have in the past. And if you put a couple examples out in front of them, I think you could get some traction on that and get some people to migrate over to the better performing plans.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Mena, did you have a question?
Ms. Nájera, I just would like some sort of implementation as far as some sort of, educating our people a little bit better so they can maybe migrate, maybe a workshop, or I don't know, something.
And that's certainly something that that HR should do to educate our employees about what each plan is and what the cost is for each plan to our employee. Looking at our last workshop that we had in November, between the Premier plan and the Basic plan, their coverage is 90% on Premier, it's 80% on Basic. Just one instance, the deductible for a single in network on the Premier plan is $650. The deductible for in network on Basic is $1,000. So we're looking at $350. And yet Premier plan employees pay $100 more a month. And that's just single employee. Hold on, where's on the Premier plan, an employee plus family pays $740 a month. The basic plan for employee plus family pays $542 a month. So there's $200 difference. And, you know, the deductibles are a difference, but there aren't huge changes between the two plans. The Premier just cost a lot more. Just my thoughts. Are there any other questions or comments?
President Nakara, Paul Garcia, I got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, are the costs higher because of the COVID-19, or has that had any kind of impact on the cost being so high?
Not necessarily, because if you look at the historical slide, every year for the last 3 years, the Premier's been costing more than the basic, and that was pre-COVID. Again, someone who knows they're going to use the plan would be the one to spend the extra $100 because they know they're going to utilize it. And so your folks that are healthy are probably taking the basic plan or the HSA, and the ones that know they're going to utilize it would say, I'd rather pay now out of my pocket, even though we just did the math that shows over the long period they pay more, but they'd rather pay now than to pay later because they know they're going to use the plan. They're thinking to themselves, I have a chronic condition. I'm going to take the plan because I will meet $650 very easily and very quickly.
And
Some of it could be due to COVID. You're starting to see some COVID claims come in, but I wouldn't say that the increase of the utilization on the Premier is COVID related.
And if I may add to that, there has been 1 year at least where no changes have been implemented. In addition to that, previous years where the plan design and or cost has not been necessarily implemented based on the recommendation, it's been minimal. So of course, throughout the years, the deficit is not necessarily mitigated. It's not necessarily being addressed. Of course, there is a change being implemented, but it's not necessarily solving the issue that we have that deficit.
Thank you.
So, Mrs. Nakada, I am wondering if the board would consider us placing this item on the agenda next week for action, and the board can decide whether they want to increase the Premier plan deductible as recommended, or they can decide whether they want to just increase the deductible for the basic, or they can decide they want to make the changes for both plans, or they can decide they don't want to make any changes. And that way we can put it and see how the board feels.
Yes, sir, Mr. Reza. The fact that we've had 2 workshops, we do have, in my opinion, better options from this workshop than we did the last. We do need to get moving on this so that our HR department does have time to educate our employees so that they make the best decision for their family. And so, yes, sir, if we can put this as an action item on for next week's board meeting.
Thank you, ma'am.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments, concerns? Okay, if there's no further business, Mr. Arias and Mr. Heisel, thank you so very much. You've done an amazing job of coming back with what we ask for different options from one extreme to the other. And we greatly appreciate all of your hard work. And Mr. Carmona, Mr. Campoya, the entire HR department, y'all have done an amazing job and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Pleasure working.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. And anything else we can do in the meantime, I'm more than happy.
Thank you. Also, Mr. Reza, you and your department making sure that we can afford this. We appreciate it. And
Thank you,
so
ma'am.
if there's no further business before this board, we are adjourned. The time is 6:29. I hope everyone has a good evening and please stay safe.
Good night, be safe.
Thank you.
Night.
Stay safe, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night, everybody.